In today's video, we're counting down some of the dumbest snake deaths ever recorded. From a Kenyan tour guide who turned a black mamba into a photo prop, to an Indian farmer who thought a cobra would make good pest control. But first, let's talk about an 18-year-old backyard breeder in Australia who felt video tutorials were all the training he needed to handle one of the world's deadliest snakes. It was April 7th, 2015, and the afternoon heat in suburban Toowoomba, Queensland, hung thick and still as Evan Alquist unlocked the garden shed behind his parents' weatherboard home, unaware that his 2-year experiment in backyard snake breeding was about to end with a fatal eastern brown snake envenomation. Evan Alquist was an 18-year-old unemployed high school graduate who had spent the last 2 years transforming his parents' garden shed into an unlicensed reptile breeding operation. He had started at 16 after binge-watching snake handling videos online, convinced that the professional breeders he admired had no special training he couldn't replicate on his own. His parents, busy with their own lives and largely absent during the day, had dismissed his hobby as a phase. Evan's reputation among his small circle of friends was that of someone who took unnecessary risks for attention. He regularly posted videos of himself free-handling venomous snakes, his bare hands gripping scaled bodies just behind their heads, about to end with a fatal eastern brown snake envenomation, the result of 2 years of unchecked confidence built on online misinformation. His goal that autumn was simple: expand his collection and eventually sell offspring to other enthusiasts through online forums. He had acquired several species without permits, keeping them in cheap plastic storage tubs, stacked haphazardly on metal shelving. Among his collection was a large adult eastern brown, likely over 5 feet, that he had purchased from a questionable source 3 months earlier. Friends who visited the shed had warned him repeatedly that he was pushing his luck, especially with the brown snake, which had grown increasingly aggressive during feeding times. Evan dismissed their concerns with the same confidence that had carried him through dozens of handling sessions without incident. The eastern brown snake is the second most venomous land snake in the world, capable of delivering a venom dose sufficient to cause fatal systemic envenomation in multiple adult humans. These snakes can grow up to 7 feet long and are notoriously fast and aggressive when threatened, capable of striking multiple times in rapid succession. Their venom contains potent procoagulant toxins and cardiotoxic components that cause rapid clotting factor consumption, internal bleeding, hypotension, and cardiovascular collapse, rather than prominent localized tissue destruction. Unlike some venomous species that deliver dry bites as warnings, eastern brown snakes typically inject significant amounts of venom with each strike. They are responsible for more deaths in Australia than any other snake species, and experts universally recommend never handling them without proper equipment, training, and immediate access to antivenom. That Tuesday afternoon, Evan had decided to transfer the brown snake to a larger enclosure. He worked alone, as he usually did, with his phone propped on a shelf to record the process for his social media followers. The shed's single window provided minimal ventilation, and the temperature inside had climbed past 90 degrees. Evan removed the lid from the plastic tub, and the snake immediately raised the front third of its body in a defensive S-curve, a clear warning signal he either didn't recognize or chose to ignore. He reached in bare-handed, attempting to grasp the snake behind its head, but his palm slipped on the smooth scales. The snake recoiled and struck at his hand, missing by inches. Evan jerked backward, knocking over an empty tub, and the noise agitated the snake further. It coiled tightly, its head tracking his movements with predatory focus. Evan muttered something inaudible on the recovered video footage and reached in again, this time trying to pin the snake's head with one hand while scooping its body with the other. The technique was clumsy and poorly executed. The next strike came without warning, the snake's head snapping forward with mechanical precision. Both fangs punctured Evan's right forearm, sinking deep into the muscle. He screamed and instinctively shook his arm violently, a reaction that increased venom dispersion through muscle movement and circulation. As he tried to pull away, the snake struck again, this time hitting his wrist. The fangs held for a fraction of a second before Evan finally wrenched his arm free, stumbling backward into the shelving unit. The pain was immediate and intense, radiating up his arm like fire spreading through dry brush. Evan clutched his forearm, blood seeping from 2 distinct puncture wounds, with limited local swelling and early bruising. He staggered towards the shed door, his phone forgotten, and still recording the empty space where he had stood. The snake, now free, slithered across the concrete floor toward a gap in the wallboards. Evan made it approximately 15 feet into the backyard before the venom's systemic effects took hold. His legs buckled, and he dropped to his knees in the patchy grass, vomiting violently. The venom's procoagulant effects rapidly consumed clotting factors, leading to internal bleeding and falling blood pressure, while hypoxia set in as circulation collapsed, rather than purely localized injury. He tried to call out, but managed only a strangled gasp. Bleeding from the bite sites, minor gum oozing and pallor were visible signs of systemic failure. He developed sudden collapse marked by profound weakness, confusion, and involuntary muscle twitching, as severe coagulopathy and hypotension disrupted cerebral perfusion. His breathing became increasingly labored as shock and cardiovascular collapse impaired oxygen delivery. He collapsed face down in the grass, still conscious but barely able to move. The entire sequence from bite to cardiovascular collapse had taken approximately 12 minutes, consistent with documented Eastern brown envenomation cases. Evan's mother arrived home at 3:47 p.m. and found him lying motionless in the yard, with moderate arm swelling and clear signs of shock and collapse, his face pale. She called emergency services immediately, her screams audible to neighbors who later gave statements to police. Paramedics arrived 14 minutes after her call, and Evan showed severe signs of envenomation and shock. They initiated aggressive supportive care, airway management, oxygen, intravenous fluids, airway support, and advanced life support measures, but did not administer antivenom in the field. Antivenom was prepared and administered upon arrival at Toowoomba Hospital, but he was pronounced dead shortly afterward at 4:23 p.m. The attending physician noted that even when antivenom was administered promptly on arrival, the extent of systemic envenomation and delay from the initial bites made reversal unlikely. Police seized the remaining snakes from the shed, including 6 venomous species kept without permits. The escaped brown snake was never recovered, prompting a brief neighborhood alert. Local news ran a cautionary story about the dangers of unlicensed reptile keeping, but it generated little attention beyond Toowoomba. No criminal charges were filed, as Evan had been an adult at 18, and the only victim of his own negligence. His parents, devastated and unable to remain in the house where their son had died, quietly sold the property 4 months later and moved interstate. The shed was demolished by the new owners. While Evan's parents quietly left the home where their son had died, a freelance tour guide on the outskirts of Nairobi would drape a black mamba across his shoulders for a photo. Unaware that a facial bite allows venom rapid systemic absorption, dramatically accelerating neurotoxic effects. It was October 19, 2017, and the afternoon sun hung heavy over the acacia-dotted plains outside Nairobi, casting long shadows across the dusty compound where Jabari Ndeti was about to make the last mistake of his life. The German tourists had been asking about dangerous animals all morning, their cameras ready, their excitement palpable. And Jabari, always eager to deliver a story worth retelling, decided to give them something they would never forget. Jabari Ndeti was a 34-year-old freelance safari guide who had built his reputation on spectacle rather than safety. Unlike the guides employed by the established tour companies with their standardized protocols and insurance requirements, Jabari operated independently, taking clients who wanted experiences that felt raw and unfiltered. He was known around Nairobi's budget safari circuit as the guide who would get you close to the action, the one who didn't just talk about wildlife, but interacted with it. His colleagues considered him reckless. His clients thought he was fearless. He had handled snakes before, puff adders, cobras, even a python once, always without incident, which had likely reinforced his belief in his own abilities. This trip was supposed to be straightforward, a day tour for 4 German tourists who had specifically requested him after hearing of his previous demonstrations. The compound where Jabari operated sat on the outskirts of the city, a collection of corrugated metal structures and dusty yards where he kept various animals for educational purposes, though many of these holdings were illegal under Kenyan wildlife regulations. He lived in a small room behind the main building, his income unpredictable but occasionally lucrative when tourists tipped well. His colleagues heard previously that his goal was to save enough to start a legitimate safari company. But for now, he relied on word of mouth and the kind of performances that made people reach for their wallets. The wooden crate sat in the shade of the main building, its contents known only to Jabari and a few other local guides who had warned him repeatedly about keeping it. Black mambas are among Africa's most feared snakes, and for good reason. They can grow up to 14 feet long and are among the fastest snakes, capable of rapid bursts of movement that exceed human reaction time. Their venom is a potent neurotoxin capable of delivering a large, potentially fatal dose in a single effective bite, leading primarily to progressive paralysis of the respiratory muscles. Without antivenom, the mortality rate is extremely high, with death often occurring over several hours as paralysis advances and breathing fails. They are notoriously defensive when cornered and may strike rapidly if provoked. When the German tourists asked about dangerous wildlife, Jabari saw an opportunity. He had shown them photographs, described encounters, but their expressions showed they wanted more. One of them, a man in his 50s, asked if Jabari had ever actually handled a dangerous snake. Jabari smiled and told them to wait. He walked to the wooden crate, ignoring the quick glance of concern from his assistant, a younger man named David who helped with logistics. David had repeatedly warned him that the snake could kill him and that he should never handle it bare-handed, but Jabari waved him off. The crate's lid came off with a creak of nails against wood. Inside, coiled in the dim interior, the black mamba lay mostly still. Jabari had kept it for 3 weeks, feeding it live rats and convincing himself that this constituted some form of relationship. He reached in with his bare hands, grasping the snake behind its head, despite the fact that this is considered extremely dangerous even for trained herpetologists. The mamba was nearly 9 feet long, its body thick and muscular. The tourists gasped excitedly. Jabari, probably feeding off their reaction, made a show of it, explaining in his accented English that this was one of Africa's deadliest creatures, that most people never got this close, that it required absolute respect and understanding. He draped the snake across his shoulders like a living scarf, though its head remained tense, raising and lowering slightly, a clear warning of defensive agitation. The mamba's tongue flicked rapidly, tasting the air, sensing the heat and movement around it. David, standing several feet away, noticed it first, the subtle flattening of the snake's neck, the increased tension in its body. He called out a warning, but Jabari waved him off, too focused on his audience. The tourists were snapping photos frantically, delighted by the spectacle. One of them asked if they could touch it. Jabari was turning to answer, his head angled to the left, when the mamba struck. The attack was faster than human reaction time. The snake delivered a single, precise defensive bite, its head snapping forward in a fraction of a second, with follow-up strikes snapping through the air but failing to connect. Its fangs punctured the skin of his right cheek just below the cheekbone. A large dose of venom was injected directly into the highly vascular tissue of his face, mere inches from major blood vessels. Jabari screamed, a single sharp cry of shock and pain, and grabbed at the snake, pulling it away from his body. The mamba disengaged and retreated, disappearing under the scrap metal and brush at the edge of the compound. The tourists stood frozen. Jabari staggered backward, hand pressed to his cheek where 2 puncture wounds were already swelling. Within 20 minutes, early neurotoxic symptoms set in, with tingling, facial weakness, and muscle twitching spreading down his face and neck. He attempted to speak, but words came slurred. David dialed emergency services immediately, providing a precise location and explaining it was a black mamba bite to the face. The ambulance arrived in approximately 18 minutes, navigating unpaved dirt roads on the outskirts of Nairobi. The paramedics found Jabari conscious but deteriorating steadily. They applied a pressure immobilization bandage and provided oxygen before transporting him to the hospital. The bite's location, close to the brain in tissue rich with blood vessels, meant the neurotoxin spread efficiently. Respiratory muscle weakness progressed over the next hour, his chest movements becoming shallow and irregular as paralysis advanced. Jabari died within 1 hour of the bite, his respiratory system failing as he lost the ability to breathe independently. Antivenom was delayed on arrival, a common limitation in smaller Kenyan hospitals, and supportive measures were insufficient to reverse the paralysis in time. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as respiratory failure, secondary to neurotoxic envenomation from a black mamba bite, noting minimal local injury but profound systemic neuroparalysis. The safari company that occasionally contracted Jabari's services immediately terminated all snake demonstrations across their operations. The German tourists provided statements to police and left Kenya 2 days later, their vacation irrevocably altered. David found other work with a legitimate tour operator. No memorial service was held for Jabari. His family, embarrassed by the circumstances of his death and the illegal keeping of dangerous animals, buried him quietly. As Jabari's guests returned home with stories they'd never forget, a small-scale farmer in India would release a cobra inside his own home to solve a rat problem, unaware that venom doesn't distinguish between pest and provider. It was June 2nd, 2014, and the stifling heat of rural Punjab pressed down on the small village of Malwa Kalan like a weight. The air thick with dust and the smell of ripening wheat, as Harjit Malwa stood in his darkened storage room holding a burlap sack that writhed with the movements of the cobra inside, a solution to his rat problem that would kill him before midnight. Harjit Malwa was a 52-year-old farmer who worked a modest plot of land that had been in his family for 3 generations. He was known throughout the village as stubborn, the kind of man who dismissed modern methods in favor of what he called traditional wisdom, though his neighbors often pointed out that his traditions were frequently just his own ideas dressed up as ancestral knowledge. His wheat and rice crops were adequate but not exceptional, and he supplemented his income by storing grain for other farmers in a converted room of his house. The rats had become a serious problem over the past month, chewing through sacks and contaminating stores with their droppings. He had lost nearly a quarter of his inventory, and the farmers who had paid him for storage were beginning to complain. His neighbor, Gurmeet, had suggested commercial rat poison or snap traps, even offering to lend him several. Harjit had waved him off dismissively saying chemicals were expensive and traps required constant monitoring. He had announced his plan 3 days earlier. He would catch a cobra from the fields and release it in his house to hunt the rats naturally. Gurmeet and several other villagers had told him this was insane, that cobras were unpredictable and dangerous, and that bringing one into a home where his wife and 3 children slept was illegal and reckless beyond measure. Harjeet had laughed at their concerns, insisting that snakes were nature's solution to rodents, that his grandfather had done the same thing, though no one could verify this claim. His wife had protested, but she said that Harjeet had dismissed her worries as feminine overcaution. The fields surrounding the village were a patchwork of irrigation channels and crop rows, the earth cracked and dry between waterings, with dense vegetation along the drainage ditches where snakes sheltered from the heat. Indian cobras are among the most dangerous snakes in South Asia, responsible for thousands of deaths annually. They typically grow between 4 and 6 feet in length, with fangs capable of delivering a potentially fatal dose of venom, especially when more than one effective bite occurs. The venom is primarily neurotoxic, attacking the nervous system and causing progressive paralysis that eventually stops the diaphragm from functioning, leading to respiratory failure. Cobras are generally shy and will flee from humans when possible, but when cornered or threatened, they become highly defensive, raising their distinctive hoods and striking with remarkable speed and accuracy. Cobras brought indoors are highly unpredictable and unlikely to hunt rodents effectively. Stress and confinement usually make defensive strikes far more likely than purposeful hunting. Harjeet had found the cobra 2 days earlier, coiled near an irrigation channel. Using a forked stick and a burlap sack, he had managed to capture it, a process that had taken nearly an hour, according to neighbors. He kept the snake in the sack, tied shut, and placed in a clay pot in his shed, feeding it nothing, believing hunger would make it hunt better, though in reality this only made it more defensive. His eldest son, Navdeep, who was 19 and home from technical college, had seen the pot and asked his father what he was doing. When Harjeet explained, Navdeep had stared at him in disbelief, asking if he understood how dangerous this was. Harjeet had told him to mind his studies and let men handle practical matters. On the evening of June 2nd, after his wife and younger children had gone to visit her sister in the next village, Harjeet decided it was time. Navdeep was in the front room studying when he heard his father moving around in the storage area. Harjeet carried the clay pot into the house, the sack inside still moving. He had no protective gloves, snake hooks, or other safety equipment, planning to guide the snake toward the storage room where the rats were most active. He untied the sack in the narrow hallway between the main room and the storage area, then tipped it over and stepped back. The cobra emerged slowly, its body uncoiling as it tasted the air with its tongue, disoriented by the sudden change in environment. Based on brief statements from Harjeet, this is how the accident unfolded. He made his first mistake by trying to direct the snake immediately. He jabbed at it with the broom, trying to push it toward the storage room door. The cobra, already stressed from days in captivity, reacted defensively. It raised the front third of its body off the ground, spreading its hood wide, a clear warning display that Harjeet either didn't recognize or chose to ignore. He jabbed again, and the snake began moving, but not toward the storage room. It moved toward the corner where shadows offered perceived safety. Harjeet stepped forward to cut it off. The broom extended, and the cobra struck. The first bite hit Harjeet's right thigh, the fangs punching through the thin cotton of his garment and sinking deep into the muscle. The strike was so fast that Harjeet didn't register it until the snake had already pulled back. He shouted in pain and surprise, stumbling backward, and the cobra struck again immediately, hitting the same leg slightly higher, closer to the groin. These were 2 full, effective bites, delivering 2 full venom-injecting bites, with the second strike occurring dangerously close to major blood vessels in the upper thigh, accelerating systemic spread. The fangs left 4 distinct puncture wounds, each bleeding slightly, with visible puncture wounds and progressive swelling, while systemic neurotoxic effects advanced rapidly. Navdeep heard his father's shout and ran from the front room. He found Harjit staggering in the hallway, the cobra already fleeing toward the rafters, its body disappearing into the shadows above. Harjit was clutching his thigh, his face contorted, trying to explain what had happened. Navdeep could see the bite marks. He ran to the neighbor's house, pounding on Gurmeet's door, shouting for help. Within minutes, several neighbors had gathered. They found Harjit sitting on the floor, his back against the wall, his leg marked by intense swelling and bleeding. The venom was working rapidly. Harjit had vomited twice. His breathing had become labored, each breath requiring visible effort. Sweat poured down his face despite the evening coolness. The pain in his leg was intense, and he was moaning continuously, a low sound that frightened the neighbors more than screaming would have. They loaded him into the back of Gurmeet's pickup truck, Navdeep climbing in beside his father. The nearest clinic with antivenom was in the town of Moga, nearly 15 miles away on poorly maintained roads, resulting in a prolonged transport time. No airway support or assisted ventilation was available during transport. As they drove, Harjit's condition deteriorated rapidly. The paralysis began in his extremities, a tingling numbness spreading upward. His eyelids began to droop, the muscles controlling them affected by the neurotoxin. His breathing became increasingly shallow as the venom attacked the nerves controlling his diaphragm. Navdeep held his father's hand, watching helplessly as consciousness faded from his eyes. They arrived at the clinic approximately 40 minutes after the bite. Medical staff rushed out to meet them, but Harjit was already unresponsive, his breathing barely perceptible. They carried him inside and attempted resuscitation, administering antivenom and providing respiratory support. But the absence of early ventilation combined with the double thigh envenomation and long transport had allowed respiratory paralysis to progress beyond reversal. His diaphragm had stopped functioning, and despite manual ventilation efforts, his heart stopped within minutes. He was declared dead at 9:47 p.m. Clinical assessment determined the cause of death to be respiratory failure due to neurotoxic envenomation from an Indian cobra bite. The house was fumigated the following day by a professional snake handler from Moga, who found the cobra coiled in the rafters above the storage room and removed it. Harjit's family held a funeral attended by most of the village. Navdeep left college to help support the family, taking work in Moga and sending money home. Thanks for watching. If you liked these stories, click here.